Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Avorion episode 55. I'm Enigmius, and today, the last in the build series for the station, the Frontier Station. You'll notice I'm not advertising the presence of a blueprint, and that's because unfortunately there isn't one. And there's not, unfortunately, a whole lot that I can do about it right now. But that doesn't rule out the possibility that there won't be one for the station in the future. And I'll show you why a little bit later, but for now we're going to finish the build. We're going to let you see what went into the last elements of the build so that you might be able to take something away from it, a technique, an idea, something for one of your own builds. We'll take care of this, and then we'll look into the finished station, all of the various different bits and pieces, and we'll talk about blueprints and blueprints that are not, because this one kind of turned into a bit of a mess. You can see what we're doing here is we've got this elliptical profile set up, and now we're building these slabs that intersect with the various different points on that profile, so that when we remove the profile, we'll be left with these slabs that still give the eye the impression that there's a curve taking place. And once we do that, once we've got that basic sort of shape set up, we take each of these slabs that are intersecting with the elliptical profile and we turn it into a disc that's centered in the center point of the station, and they just kind of get a little bit smaller progressively as they work from the bottom up until we're left with something that is basically a series of discs that looks like it's a dome, but without requiring us to do all of the time-consuming and extremely challenging work of making all of the seams line up as best we possibly can on something this size. And in this case, with a build that is already over 100,000 blocks, by the time it's done, it's not at this specific point that we're looking at now, but by the time it's done, it will be over 100,000 blocks after merging everything. And that, quite frankly, is more than the game is really set up to handle. And that's not a criticism of the game, that's just the way it is. And I understand that there's a lot to be said for the benefits of optimizing. And I also understand that optimizing on a large scale is usually not done until a game is sort of nearing the end of the initial development cycle. So I'm not suggesting that the developers could, should, would be doing a better job of optimizing the game at this point. All I know is that we've pushed the game beyond what it can reasonably be expected to handle in the build mode, and you can see this is sped up quite aggressively. This is 10 times the actual normal speed that you would be looking at this in real time, and it's just because it's a fairly straightforward process that we're involved in, and you don't necessarily need to see it much slower than that to understand what's going on. But what you can see is that the cursor, in a lot of cases, the mouse pointer is several steps ahead of where the blocks are being placed. And that's because we're working ahead of what the game is capable of keeping up with at this point. And it doesn't get any better as it goes along. It only gets worse. And consequently, it got to a point where continuing to build and do some of the things that I wanted to do to improve this station, the looks, once we got this primary structure complete, just didn't really seem all that appealing, because there's that process of placing something and then waiting for it to appear, or working ahead of yourself, just kind of placing things where you know they're going to appear eventually and just keeping ahead of the curve. Either option has sort of its benefits and its drawbacks, and neither one of them offered the benefits that warranted the drawbacks after a certain point. So I kind of had to make the decision that we had taken the station as far as we could go, and it was time to move on, I guess you could say. One of the things that I enjoyed about this process is that it was an opportunity to do a little bit of additional messing around with the cut and paste features, because what you're seeing now is basically we're prototyping this concept. We're taking this slab and then we built up some temporary blocks to match the profile of the circle beneath the slab that we're working on now, and we're extending it into a disc. And then we've got everything, we'll have everything lined up and everything will be where it's supposed to be, and we can check and make sure that it's going to have that effect that we're looking for. Remove the temporary blocks that define the outer perimeter of this circular slab that we're working on, and decide from there how we want to handle it. But what I knew I wanted to do was have, like we did on the lower half or the lower portion of the station, I wanted to have rows of the glow blocks, similar to like what we've already got here, that give the impression that there's some sort of like window going on, like there's something happening in the station that's not just a big block of material, that there's, you know, people in there ostensibly doing important things in space on a station. But at this stage here, it's fairly straightforward because we're just kind of putting things in place for the first time. But when you look at the number of slabs that we have to put in and the number of discs that we have to stack on top of this one in order to finish what we're looking at, to do it all manually would be quite the undertaking. And given those performance issues that we've been having, it becomes less and less enjoyable. So I wanted to take advantage of some of the features that allow us to do things quicker and easier, and in this case to copy paste, to allow us to create these additional profiles in a way that doesn't require as much time as what it's taking if we were to do it all manually. And it works really, really well. That was one of the things that I noticed fairly early on, and that I really appreciated, was that the copy and the paste features very, very handy in places and reasons that you would never normally even think of. But when you get to a point where you're desperate just to try and get things into place because the game isn't performing very well anymore, it makes a big difference. You can see here we're using the convert feature. We're converting these hull blocks, or these hull slope edges, to the glow edges. It's you see I missed there. There's another one a little bit farther back where I missed, and then I just missed again, and it's because we're working ahead of the curve. And it's very, very easy to get a little bit of a lag spike when you think that you're about to click on the right spot, and then the mouse hops and you're suddenly not on the right spot anymore. So there's a certain amount of difficulty attached to the process of converting blocks like that. It's very easy to miss, and then things being what they are, you have to go back and you have to change things, and etc., etc. It's not necessarily the best approach that we have. But having set that up now, we've got that first disc above the central cylinder of the station, and now you can see we're basically going around and filling in the profile of all of these individual discs from all of these slabs, and that will be what we can use to copy and paste a couple of blocks lower, so that we don't have to do each of those things twice. And then in between, we will have the blocks that we can line up to place the glow blocks. Instead of converting the hull blocks to glow blocks, we'll just place them. The odds of a miss become significantly less. It's just the way that it seems to work. It worked better for me to place the glow blocks instead of just trying to convert them. And consequently, this whole process of getting each of these circles into place, getting these profiles lined up, was the most time-consuming aspect of this part of the build, just because we're talking about a lot of blocks, a lot of referring to the website that I was using to do the layout for the circles. Ultimately, everything gets done. We get everything taken care of. The cut and the paste works really well. Very happy with that. And then we get to the point where it's time to start putting the finishing touches on and pushing towards completion, getting ready to offer the blueprint and all of those other things. And the game is just getting slower and slower through this whole process. Nevertheless, we were able to get this dome finished, and I was looking at it, and between basically the lines of the glow blocks on each of these slabs and the lines on the underside of the station as well, it looked very uniform and very kind of dull to me. It seemed like there was an opportunity to kind of shake things up a little bit, make them a little bit less uniform, just for the sake of interest. So what I did was I went around and I converted a lot of the glow edges that we had placed back to hull blocks so that you get that impression that there are some windows that are where the lights are on in behind and some that where they're off, or maybe there's some, you know, beams or you know, structural elements in between the windows that kind of, it just breaks it up and makes it a little bit more interesting. And that seemed to work well. I was going to do the same thing on the underside, the lower portion of the station where we've got all those rings. And by then the performance was really just kind of impossible to work with for something on that scale. It was just, I was looking at it and I was thinking how much happier I would be if we were to do the same thing to the bottom that we did to the top. And ultimately it just came down to, we were at the end of the usefulness for this whole setup, and it was going to be necessary to kind of make certain decisions about whether or not we were going to be able to do exactly what we wanted to do or just be happy with what we had. This whole station turned into an exercise in circles, which we didn't really need. I mean, it would be one thing if I had done all of these circles freehand, but realistically speaking, in all fairness, I obviously didn't. I used the layouts that were available to me online, so I can't take credit for that. It's not like we were doing something here that was involved a great deal of skill on my part. It was just duplicating the information that I was able to get from a tool that someone else had made. There were certain things that I liked about the station. There's certain things that I like about having the station now because it gives me an opportunity to experiment with having a station and the things that are available to me, just for the sake of having that familiarity. But it's also a double-edged sword in the sense that we have a station that's not what I necessarily wanted it to be because we pushed things too far, and then we ended up with kind of a situation with the actual uploading of the blueprint itself. Before we get too carried away with the upload shenanigans, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to see the finished station as far as it goes. This is the upscaled version. I've saved a version of the original size. If something changes and I'm able to upload it, I will, and there will be a blueprint for that. And then there's this one here that is, I forget what size it is relative to the original. The way that the scaling works is when you choose the option to modify the entire ship, you get a little menu here and you're at a scale of 1. This is the scale of 1, and you can scale it back and you can scale it all the way up to 2. And then when you apply those changes, you can come back and it's back at 1 again, and you can scale it up to 2, and you can basically scale it up as many times as you want. It's just you're forced to do it, basically doubling in size each time. And I set it up, I scaled it up twice, up to 2, and then because of the cost, I dialed it back to 0.75. So it ended up being 0.75 of what it was, which was, I think, 4 times the original size. So if my math is correct, which it probably is not, this station is 3 times the size of the original. And I just wanted to kind of point out, let's see here if we can get the right menu up. Oh, here we go. Now I remember. It's going to take a second to load all of these things. I'm not going to make you watch this whole process. So this is the version that we're looking at now. It's 25 million credits, 1.3, almost 1.4 million Xanian, and then we've got some small amounts of the luster materials. Ternium for the glow bits and iron for the inertial dampeners. So there's a little bit of those snuck in there for no good reason except for we could. The original size, when it was 4 times instead of 3, the material costs were just astronomical. There was absolutely no way I thought anyone would be interested in spending that much on a station, especially one that's not especially large. It doesn't really have a whole lot in terms of hit points. It's got about 500,000 hit points on the hull. The whole thing is covered by integrity field generators. It's got about 1 million hit points on the shields. It looks like 2.3 million here, but that's because I've got a system, a very high-end system that's increasing the shield capacity. So that's a little bit misleading if you're looking at that. A little over 100,000 blocks total. And then we've got the usual suspects down here. We've got plenty of room for more crew than you could ever possibly need. We've got plenty of power. We've got plenty of power generation relative to the consumption. So it's not a horrible station, I don't think. You can see when we're not actually actively building anything onto it, it doesn't really seem to have that much of an impact on the performance of the game. We can kind of move around, look at a variety of different things, perform whatever actions we want very, very easily. But once we start actually modifying it and expecting it to do more than what it's currently doing, it gets a little bit crazy. I finished off the top a little bit. You can see we've got some pretty plain but interesting looking details, I find, especially from a distance. It is very simple, but it adds a little something to the station where it definitely needed it. And of course we've got the hangar on the underside. So that's as far as we can go right now, and we're going to show you exactly why. We're going to try and upload to the workshop. We're going to call this Frontier Station Alpha, just in case it actually does go this time. Normally I would fill in this and all of the other things, but right now that's not really what we're looking at. Submit new craft. After a brief pause, error while uploading. You can see it brings up the Steam page, which is of absolutely no use to us. And it returns a game, and you can see error while uploading. My sense is it's simply too large and Steam is rejecting it as a result. I haven't investigated that. I haven't even looked at my hard drive to see what the size of the file is for this particular ship station. I just think that that's probably the reason why it's not working. So we'll see. We'll kind of maybe check back on it from time to time, and if I'm able to get it up and available as a blueprint, then I'll make sure to let everybody know. In the meantime, we get to move on now. We get to try some different projects, and given that we weren't able to provide a blueprint for this project right away, I decided it might be fun, instead of jumping directly to the carrier, to spend one, maybe 2 episodes building some fighters that we'll be able to offer as a blueprint, just so that people have something, given that we weren't able to offer anything in the form of the station. And the fighters, by their very nature, will be fairly small. The builds won't take a long time, and there will probably be a variety that we can offer people that they can kind of take and modify and do whatever the hell they want with. But that to me is maybe a happy medium, just to kind of balance things out. And then immediately once those fighters are complete, we'll be diving into the construction of the carrier that will be carrying some of those fighters around. The nice thing about having this station here, whether it's good, bad, or somewhere in between, is that it's a platform that I can use to mess around and test and learn different things, including the production and maintenance of a squadron of fighters. And this thing apparently can hold a great many fighters, depending on the size of them relative to the size of the hangar. So that's where we're at. Again, I do apologize if you're looking forward to the blueprint for this particular project. Obviously it was out of my hands and we did what we could, but that was the best that we could do. So if you want to be notified about the next episode and other episodes in this and other series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.